Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. Before we get started, just a note that today's art chat will be recorded and shared on our YouTube page. So you're welcome to keep your cameras off if you would prefer. I'll also ask that everyone make sure to mute themselves so that we have no background noise for the conversation. And don't worry, we will allow some time at the end for any questions that you may have. I'm going to now share my screen and we'll get started. Go back to the beginning here. All right. So thank you so much for joining me for today's art chat conversation. This is a series of conversations that is taking place during the run of our Landscape, Climate, the Environment, and Beyond exhibition. These chats feature conversations with some of the artists who are featured in the exhibition. We're very pleased to have the artist Jeremy Chen with us today. Jeremy Chen is an artist and an educator with an MFA in printmaking and a specialization in sculpture, a University of Iowa Center for the Book Arts certificate, and a Bachelor of Arts in Studio Art with a K-12 education certification from the University of Iowa. He produces work through individual practice, including sculpture, print, and drawing, collaborative cultural production side by side with other artists, including interactive installations, performances, book arts, and he works to engage the public or specific communities. He is an advocate for artist-run spaces and works closely with Public Space One in Iowa City. He currently teaches sculpture and drawing at Grinnell College, where he is an assistant professor of art and chair of the American Studies concentration in Grinnell, Iowa. So thank you so much for joining us today, Jeremy. We really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much, Julia, and thanks everyone watching right now or in the future. I'm really delighted to be here with you.
Fantastic. So I wanted to start with the piece that is in the Landscape exhibition, which is Row from 2023. So can you tell us a bit about this work and what led you to create it?
Yeah. So this work, I think, reflects several different interests that I have coming together in one place. And I think sometimes making artwork is like that. You don't always know where you're going to end up. But I'm somebody who really loves the natural world. I go out to natural places near where I live, or I travel and camp and am out and about in the natural world. And I like to canoe. I like to kayak. And I had gotten a canoe, and I had younger kids. That was great. I could have two or three of us in the canoe, and I had myself as a paddler and one of the kids as a paddler. And but eventually these guys grew up, got a little older, didn't have as much time for canoeing with their dad. And I could find friends to canoe with, but I ended up thinking, wow, I'd like to see if I could make something so I could paddle this canoe by myself and actually turn it into some sort of rowboat. So I made these paddles and this simple yoke and oarlock system. And I would actually use these things that you see here on my canoe and paddle around. And at the same time, I was also doing some volunteer work and some advocacy for a local environmental group that was really concerned about our water, right? And as a paddler, I was concerned about our water. We know that Iowa has impaired waters. I was concerned about our soil. I know around here we have, occasionally people that are not following rules and regulations about when they're putting on things or how much they're putting on. For instance, they might be putting manure onto frozen soil instead of, and so anyway, there were these issues where I was concerned about the soil. I knew about the hypoxic dead zone that was down in the Gulf. And I started thinking about soil and water while I was paddling, and I started thinking about it in my art practice as well. And certainly with somebody who has two 20-something young people who are gonna be in the world well into the future, I hope, that I'm thinking about our future. And So I started, thinking, and then I'm a gardener as well. So I'm thinking about my soil, I'm thinking about the water and our future. And I like this idea about rowing backwards into the future. And I was thinking about, where are we going? And are we really steering very well into the future? So I started thinking about the soil as a metaphor of something that carries us, how we need it to sustain ourselves. We need soil, water, air, all of these things. And I've been really worried about where Iowa is going in these areas. Um, I'm from Iowa City, but now that I'm based in Grinnell, I have seen the huge number of confinement feeding operations here, the CAFOs, the confined animal feeding operations, and I have friends and neighbors that have been impacted by these things. And so these were many things that were on my mind as I devised a sort of uh, a way for me to sit on this sculpture and think about these things, reflect on these things, but also share it with others about where are we going as we row backwards into the future.
Sure. And what is it about the backwards motion? What are you thinking about with that?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I feel like I can't identify which cultures I've heard that sort of have this idea.
Hmm.
I think there might be a group in Australia, for example, but there might be others as well. But I've heard about this idea about walking backwards, where you can see the past sort of in front of you. You're actually seeing the past. We're not walking straight ahead into the future. We're actually walking backwards in the future. We can't see what's coming, but we see where we've been. And the further things back are, they recede into the distance. So it's almost like this bottleneck where the further back it goes, we really can't see it accumulates history. And I feel like some of the choices that we're making now, I'm really worried that we're not reflecting on our past as well, and that we're also moving backwards in the future more blindly than we need to. We're making some decisions now that feel to me to be somewhat reckless in terms of our natural resources, in terms of our water, in terms of our land, in terms of our air, which in Iowa is some of our most precious resources, right? In terms of our dependence of growing things here and agriculturally. And I'm ashamed that we're sending, huge amounts of nitrates into our surface waters. You have the Des Moines Waterworks, really struggling to keep the nitrates out of water for people. You have contaminated wells. You have a runoff that means that we have places where we can't swim anymore, where the algae and the blooms are happening, or where toxins are really thriving because of uh, the water impairments, and that we're also sending it down to our neighbors to the south, right? These are things that just doesn't feel very Iowan to me. It's
Mm.
the Iowa that I know or knew growing up. And so I was thinking about all these things. But I also, I say these very direct things about the environment with this piece, but I also am very interested in these ideas connecting with migration, with the idea of movement of people, the boat as a larger metaphor, not only environmentally here, but also just about life, and also about the movement of people and moving from one place to another.
Sure. As a piece that is both sculptural and can be activated by performance, I think that's something that's really interesting, and I want to talk more about that with you. But first, I wanted to share a brief clip of you performing the piece when it was first exhibited in 2023, I believe.
Yeah.
So I was having some issues with audio earlier, so hopefully this works okay for us. Let me make sure this is all the way up. Ooh. Okay. So I'm hoping you were able to hear some of that. Good, a little bit, hopefully. Um, so as you are conceiving of a piece like this that's going to be activated by performance, what is that process like? How are you kind of figuring out what the piece itself and the activation will look like? What is that process like?
Right. Yeah, I think that's always interesting for me because it really depends on the site where I am exhibiting the piece. So, for example, this site here, I was able to perform it live with an audience along with some of the other objects that were in this particular show when I had the larger show here in Grinnell. And then moving to the Cedar Rapids venue and sort of the timing of that performance, I improvised a new kind of performance, a different situation where I didn't work with collaborators on it. You know, it was harder to get a team together for that. So I was lucky enough to be able to collaborate with Putu Haramayena, who's a colleague here at the Department of Music at Grinnell, and then also Terry Conrad, who's in printmaking and at the University of Iowa, who not only plays the mouth harp but makes instruments and works with sound in his prints. So I was able to collaborate with them, and that led to this opportunity of like, hey, let's improvise some sounds together along with these rowing sounds and using the corrugation of the cardboard that we put down as a floor protector. We also then were saying, what was this shh kind of sound? What could that happen? You know, as they were listening to that, I was listening to them. So this improvisation was happening
Mm.
with Row at the Cedar Rapids Museum of Art. I knew that at the opening there would be a large gathering of people, you know, with such a wonderful range of work in the show, many artists there. And I tried something new, which was trying to divide the audience into two parts of the room and having them participate in it. So as I was rowing, I would call out to them to make uh, a sound to sort of mimic water, right? So, or waves moving. So they were saying shh, and then there'd be the other side of the room would say shh, and then I'd be rowing in there as well. So that was trying to engage people more with the rowing that was happening since I was the only performer there. And the rowing is a very simple. There's nothing very dramatic about it with the piece. It's a very minimal, you know, repetitive sound, but I was hoping to have people contemplate and reflect more by participating in that noise making, sound making with me of sort of, hey, we're all in this together in a way, like in a boat together, moving towards the future, and can we contemplate things? And then, you know, this piece is going to travel to Kansas City this
Mm.
summer, and that actually will be displayed in a group show that is about sound. So it's about deep
Mm.
listening and sound. And I actually will not be available to perform it. I'll be out of the country. So we're actually trying to find a performer to work with it and improvise. And so that's an interesting thing that I'm talking with that curator about is how will this function in that space with the other work that's there and with a person who's performing it who's not me. So
Mhm.
so that's still to be determined. But I think it's just a wonderful thing to say, oh, it's in this space or that space, and what's going to work here. You know, because even this clip here, this is not from a live performance. This was from a video documentation of several performances. So this, you know, doesn't have the audience that would normally be there right in person listening to it.
Sure. And I want to jump ahead a little bit. I had some
Mhm.
images of the exhibition where this piece was
Mm,
originally displayed. But since we're kind of on the topic of these pieces and how they're different in different contexts and how they're kind of flexible in that way and can change based on the
hmm.
space and what's happening with it, I think now I wanted to talk a little bit about Trap for Greta. So I'm going to go forward
Yeah.
to those images and we can come back. It's thinking. There we go.
Mm,
So Trap for Greta, can you tell us a bit about this piece, originally performed last year
right.
at the Open Air Media Festival?
Yes. Yeah. Um, this is one of those projects where I'm not exactly sure where the idea came from. And I think that's the luxury of being somebody who has time in the studio, has carries a little sketchbook notebook around everywhere with them. And I had been interested in, well, I'd maybe I'll back up. I guess so. I know parts of looking back, I think I have some ideas about where this came from. But so uh, during and after the pandemic, I just became an avid, even more than usual. I became a very avid hiker in the woods and hiker getting off the trails. And I had a dog with me for much of that time. And I would just spend a lot of time just observing things that I would see. And I was really paying attention to the logs and the trees and all of those kinds of things. And I was thinking about trails, the animal trails, because I would be doing this year round. So you'd see evidence in the winter, even if I wasn't seeing animals, I'd see these trails in the snow or on the ice or in the mud. I'd see tracks and then you'd see trails of bugs that, the beetles that had been underneath the bark and all these things. And I'd see beavers that had animals, all kinds of animals that gnaw, right? But beavers and mice and evidence of this and all kinds of things. And of course, deer and coyote and gnawing of bones and all that. So I was seeing a lot of marks on all kinds of surfaces and lots of trails and cycles, circuits, sort of these ways of making trails and thinking about trails. And I'd been thinking a lot about migration and immigration and things like that as well. So a lot of wide-ranging thinking and trying to connect disparate things. But I became fascinated with sort of carving into pieces of wood. And I was able to source from our local prairie here that the college has some land, a prairie called Conard Environmental Research Area, and they were downing some limbs that were in the way that were dangerous for people. And I was able to source a few different kinds of tree limbs
Mm,
and start to carve into them. And I was thinking about vulnerability, right, in lots of different ways: human vulnerability, environmental vulnerability, but also resilience. And so I started getting this idea about, and I'd been playing with formal ideas about suspension a lot as you went through some of those other images. I'd been thinking about suspension
mm,
and things that were on springs or hanging from higher up. And so I somehow had this idea of a tripod with these logs and carving them away, but leaving some parts and sort of making these marks almost like gnawing at it. And I was thinking about time and sort of the deeper time. And I was thinking about ice. And so I created this huge ice block. It doesn't look very big, really, but it's 150 pounds.
mm,
And really stretches that spring. And I like this idea of that ice melting slowly over time. And I like the idea that a human body would be sort of implicated with all of that. That would be sort of uh, markers of human time, but also, there's other kinds of time, geological time, um, and I wanted the ice to be, I guess, in a way, I was thinking of the ice as also being sort of precarious and not menacing exactly, but that the human figure might be involved with it in some way where if it was suspended above me as the human here in this case, that it would sort of be this impending thing, right, and would fluctuate. So this came out of some of these. I know that's a bunch of random strands of thinking in a way, but that's where this sort arrived from. And so I did this first version that I performed in Iowa City at the Open Air Media Festival, again from wood that was sourced here on our prairie lands and woodlands. Um, and so this is the first iteration, and it all worked a little bit differently than I'd imagined, but it was a good start.
Hmm. And now it will be in Venice,
Right.
um, as part of an exhibition at the European Cultural Center, a collateral event going on at the same time as the Venice Biennale.
Yeah.
Um, and so, this too, how does the piece change based on the location and the materials that you're using here as well? How do you kind of conceive of that change?
Yeah. I appreciate that question, Julia, because it really is so different in each site, right? So we
Mhm.
have these. I was really fortunate working with the folks there at the European Cultural Center and an assistant. I had to do some planning while I was here in Iowa or try to arrange some things ahead. And I was really lucky to be able to find this person who makes furniture out of these pieces of wood that you see here are called arbricola, and they are placed in the lagoon. Since it's all boat navigation there, they're placed in the lagoon to almost be like the yellow and white lines on the road, or to show where shallow areas where you can't go. So they're really indicating these channels where boat traffic should go. And I was very, very fortunate to be able to salvage some pieces, right? They start to rot, especially at the water line when the tide comes in and out. They're sort of okay above the water line and they're pretty okay below the water line, but it's where it gets water and then oxygen, water, oxygen. And then these worms come in and start to degrade everything. So I got interested in that as well, because you'd see these sort of degrade over time. Of course, water does do a lot, even to a great piece of white oak like these are. And my guess is that these are mostly sourced from probably further east in Europe, like Croatia and elsewhere. They're growing these and then bringing them into Italy. But I became really interested in this form and these tripods, and I was like, oh, this is an interesting. And they aren't all tripods. Sometimes they have 5 to 8 uh, of these logs. But I became interested in thinking about Venice, thinking about the vulnerability of that city as it has certainly pressures from over tourism. It has pressures of sea level rise. It has, the aqua alta happening where things can become flooded, and so there's a precarity there. And certainly as a World Heritage Site, it just missed being declared sort of in this emergency and threatened zone, and that's part of why they're starting to charge people like this entrance fee as if it was like a
Mhm.
Disneyland or something. But I sourced these because the site where I knew I was going to put a sculpture was, and maybe you can see in these pictures here, but it's right near the water. That is a small cruise ship right there, in the photo on the left, and then on the right there you can see a little bit of the water through the fence there, but it's very close to the water. It's right on the Riva della Schiavone, and so it's right by the water. And I thought it'd be an interesting thing to have this looking out at the lagoon and speak to and I will have ice. This will have ice. I just didn't get the ice frozen in time when I was there as I was constructing this. So I have one version here where I just have a red fuel can that's hanging, and then this weekend it opens this weekend, and there will be ice suspended on it this weekend, and then in June I'll start to go and perform with it. But yeah, this really mattered to have these particular logs that are from the lagoon for this piece, just like it mattered to have the prairie pieces, the prairie logs, the woodland from our prairie lands for the other version of it. And I don't know what other versions might happen, but these are the
Mm.
two that I've come up with so far.
Great, wonderful. I feel like I skipped too quickly over some of the works that you had in your recent work show, Devices, Tools, Objects, and Props from 2023, that was at Grinnell. Um, so what was your overall philosophy when you were thinking about that show and the works in it, they are a lot of very different works. Some thinking about some of the themes I think that you've mentioned so far, ideas of migration and kind of movement of
Mhm.
people and bodies. But tell us more about the show.
Yeah, it was such a fortunate opportunity to be able to show in that beautiful space. And just like I feel really, really happy that you guys are showing Row at the Cedar Rapids Museum of Art. Uh, I felt like this was such a large space for me to have a solo show. It's the largest solo show I've done, and I knew I had a lot of different sculptures, but I didn't know what they'd look like in the space. So I was also thinking about the space, like having some. We also knew that we couldn't make walls in between this. The
Mm,
temporary walls were being used for another smaller show next to this. So I knew I couldn't close off some spaces and create more installation kind of spaces, which would be my first impulse. So I had this larger open space, almost like an L shape as well. So I created some different areas. I really love responding to space or to a site. And so I had some things already made, and then I started to devise some things specifically for this show. And I tried to put some of them in alignment. So what you see with this slide here, with this more floor-based piece going over to the uh, carved canes on the wall, embedded in the wall with the silhouette of a figure. And
mhm,
then earlier there's a cutout of there's a silhouette of the figure there. Earlier there, you showed a slide of a cutout of a plexiglass case and then a long bit of figures there. This one, yes, lens. So if you look through, if you would look through this, this is all copy paper that's been laser cut with the silhouette of a figure. You can look through that, you'd look across that walkway, and you would see it lines up with the silhouette of the figure, the blue, light blue silhouette of the figure that is outlined by the canes, the carved canes.
mm,
So again, I think a lot of these, so I was trying to have some pieces in conversation with each other, but a lot of these pieces overall, we're still dealing with these themes of vulnerability and resilience, of a certain kind of precarity, but also a certain kind of navigating and entanglement with objects and things. So I was thinking about our entanglement with objects and things and how um, our impact on those, and but also how we navigate sort of what is our next right thing to do? What is the next
mm.
right thing to do?
Sure. I know our time is going so fast, and I want to
Mm,
make sure that we have enough time for questions. Um,
yes.
but before we do, I did just want to quickly ask you about the Moving Crew,
Hmm.
um, which you are a founding member of, and it's the world's largest art collective. Is that right?
Well, that's our made up tagline.
Okay.
Yeah. So we say that because we wanted to be so inclusive that you might already be a member, right? So,
Mm,
so we're like, we just were making up this tagline. It's the world's largest art collective because we would do these projects where we'd invite participation from all over the world, with digital calls. We would invite people to submit some artwork, and then we would do some things with that artwork, or we would use it to make, we could take an image, digitize it, and make prints out of it and use it, or put it in a book or in various projects, installations that we made. So it was a collaborative group with a core ranging sometimes from 6 to 12 people, but then these larger invitations for people to participate. And we just wanted to have dialogue around a lot of different issues. Usually they were involving the movement of people, goods, ideas, and how are those sort of regulated differently? How come people cross borders less easily than ideas and goods? What are the controls on those things? Just asking a lot of questions about territory and land and objects, and some of this just came out of our looking at things like shipping containers as one model of how things move, and of course a very ubiquitous object, but it's really showing a deeper network of global capital of how the economy's doing, right? When economy's not doing well, there's a whole bunch of boats just waiting with empty shipping containers in sort of these ghost shipyards. And when it's doing really well, they're in motion, they're blocking canals, so, or running into bridges. Um, so yeah, it was fun to be able to investigate ideas with other people.
Yeah, absolutely. And what is the activity that we're seeing in the images here, this particular project?
This particular project, we had screen printed uh, nearly 2,000 miniature shipping containers. They were to scale, and then when you put them all together, they created a large actual size shipping container.
Hmm.
So these were the modules that were miniature shipping containers that when you put them together, they were the size of a real shipping container. And then we worked with a group of dancers, and they were doing some various exercises where they would deconstruct that larger shipping container, reconfigure it, take it around to different places. We did some of this in some other cities as well. So we were also doing things like teaching people how to screen print onto these. So we actually made two of these shipping containers. We made one in Croatia, in Rijeka, Croatia. Um, that's still there. And then we made one in the United States. So sort of thinking about different sites.
Great.
And the imagery on these was all sourced from artists from all over,
Mm.
and people could provide different images for it on this theme.
How interesting. Um, Great. Are there upcoming projects with the moving crew that you're thinking about working on?
Moving crews on hold right now.
Okay.
So
Okay.
life got busy for people, and collaboration is not easy. It might be done. We're not sure. We had a show last year, or we had some things from the museum in Rijeka acquired our piece, and it was shown again last year, or parts of
Mm.
it were.
Great.
So sometimes things come up, but right now I think we're on a pretty long hiatus because
Mm.
people just don't have time to
Sure.
work on it. So
Sure. Well, I want to open it up to questions now from our audience. So, are there
wonderful.
any questions for Jeremy about his work? And if not, I know I have a couple more, but any questions for Jeremy? Well, I know you as a very engaged artist, thinking about all of these, very complicated, sometimes difficult topics in your work. I see you being engaged in your community and different organizations around you, thinking about all of these different topics. I know you have your website where you sell your work and then donate 100% of the proceeds to different organizations. Um, and all of that makes me wonder about kind of activism and art. And if you think of yourself as being kind of an activist artist, does that have meaning to you? Is that something that you think about? How do you understand that term? Do you see that as something that plays out in your work? Or does that kind of not have any bearing on what you're thinking about?
Yeah, such a good question because I think it's really complicated.
Mhm.
What does that mean to take on the role of an activist through your work? Is it something that is really separate from the work or with the work? Do we have activist dentists or activist
Mm.
lawyers or activist plumbers or so I don't know that I have a great answer for this. I think I like that the word that you use engaged, right? I think
Mhm.
a lot of my work isn't as practical as activism is, right? So while I'm thinking about ideas that are social, cultural, political, psychological, I don't know that their outcomes are activist outcomes. I think it might be more awareness, education, but in terms of actual helpfulness and activism, I probably am not doing that like somebody who's really doing the good work
Mhm.
to make positive changes. I'm not, I'm totally for those things, and I think I'm activist in some other activities that I do, but in my art making, I don't see, like for instance, Row, I don't think it's an activist
Sure,
piece, right? It's or some of these other pieces, or I feel like they're more poetic, or there might, they might provoke ideas or thoughts, but they're not um, directly activists. They're certainly not direct action, right?
sure.
That's the impulse though that I had of like, oh, I'm gonna, if I have this extra artwork, um, can I leverage these things into things that I find important in terms of certain social justice, in terms of supporting nonprofits that I feel are doing social goods, that are helping people that have needs. That is maybe the most activist that I get. And that's just a way to sort of leverage any resources I have towards trying to be helpful in society and culture.
Great, wonderful. And I know public art spaces are really important to you, and you're very engaged with like Public Space One in Iowa
Yeah.
City. What is it about those spaces that speaks to you and is something that you want to foster?
Yeah. Well, I really love sort of DIY art spaces, whether they're big or small. And I've visited ones across the country and in different countries. And what I really love is this we have very few public spaces in general in the United States where you don't have to go in and buy something, or you don't have to go in and consume a service or anything. And places like Public Space One are these wonderful spaces where I think, and they're also not elitist, right? They're not like, I think public, not all of them. I mean, there probably are some that are, but I'm thinking of ones where there's just sort of a very low bar to participate. You can just go to stuff, or you can take a workshop, you can learn a new thing. Um, and you're welcome, you're included. There's a diversity of voices that can happen in these spaces. It can be, you might go to something, I have friends that complain about it because you can go to something and you're like, actually, that was really bad. Like I've showed stuff or done stuff at these, and somebody might have thought, oh, that was really pretty bad, right? So it's a risk-taking thing. It's sort of out there, unusual. And then other times you're like, wow, that was an amazing thing I just encountered, right? So there are also spaces for connection, for artists to meet each other, talk about things. It's places for the artists and the public, public that might consider themselves as a non-artist, to meet. So I think that's what's exciting to me about these. And they don't have to schedule things out 3, 5 years out ahead, a year ahead. Sometimes it can just be very much on the ground and say, hey, we want to do this. And it's very responsive to the community or the culture, even though it can also be very connected to larger conversations and larger regions and nations. So what I like about Public Space One is how much it has this very local way of working, but it also has a regional impact, a national impact, and then also can bring in international artists. And part of that's just the diversity of everything that they're working on, right? The Center for Afrofuturist Studies, the Media Lab, Media Arts Cooperative, the Iowa City Press Co-op. There's all these amazing things that are just that let people be citizens more than consumers, I think, and I love that.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah, absolutely. I know I want to be respectful of your time, and I know we're already a little over, but I just had so many things I wanted to chat with you about today. I want to finish up by asking you what's next for you. I know you're headed to Venice in June to
Yeah,
perform Trap for Greta, but
yeah.
what's coming up? Anything else you want to share with us?
Yeah, I'm very excited to be able to perform that sculpture and try it in a bunch of different iterations. But while I'm there, I will also be working on a family history dealing with Chinese diaspora. So I've
Hmm.
been conducting some interviews with older relatives and thinking about how larger world events, national events in different countries, and economic situations, how my family's story on my dad's side really resonates with some other larger movements and of Chinese diaspora. So I've been doing the research on that, and I think I'll have some more focused time since I'm lucky enough to be able to get to Italy, time and space there to actually focus a little bit of my time on that project as well. And then I'm actually curating a drawing show next year as well. So I'm working with some people who are doing some fascinating things with drawing, expanded field of drawing that I'm excited about as well. So those are on my horizon that I'm looking forward to. And then I'm always open to, my problem is starting lots of projects and I just got to
Mhm.
keep working on finishing them. But that's what I have hopefully going on next.
Well, that's great. Well, we'll look forward to seeing what comes out of these ideas, out of these projects. I'm excited about that. We'll look forward to that.
Thanks.
And I want to thank you so much for doing this today with me, Jeremy. I really appreciate it. And I know our audience will really appreciate it as well and enjoy watching it too.
Thank you so much, Julia, and thank you, audience that's here, and thanks everyone at the Cedar Rapids Museum of Art for having Row over there. Just to really appreciate it.
Yeah, well, we're so grateful to have it here. I want to mention before I end that we do have one more art chat coming up next month. That will be with artist Jennifer Lynn Bates on Wednesday, May 15th at 12. So I hope that all of you will be able to join us for that as well. And thank you so much again, Jeremy. We so appreciate
Mm,
it, and I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of their day. Thank
mm.
you.
Thanks so much.